Hey everyone, John Hendricks here alongside Ross Jackson. Another episode of Second and Saints post game show. Saints disappointing way to lose, right? 15-12 against Philadelphia. Superdome, good energy out there
Mhm.
today. But Saints fall to 2-1. Kind of deja vu from last year for me, right? Like they were 2-0 going into Green Bay. They have a good first half performance. For the most part, I mean,
Sure.
limiting Eagles to nothing based off of the defense and
Mhm.
stuff. But then at the end, they it was ugly. Let's just say that, right? Like a lot of it was ugly. Defensively, it was ugly. Offensively, it was ugly. Losing Eric McCoy hurt a lot, but
Mhm.
they put themselves in a position to win at the end of the game. And then the defense miscommunication, all this stuff, or getting tied up. I mean, that's just a tough way to lose a game.
Yeah, it's tough. And look, this was a game too where the Saints weren't able to really get their offense going. They weren't able to get their ground game going. Philadelphia came in with a really, really stout plan to stop the
Yep.
run, and they executed it extremely well. A lot of Saints players in the locker room kind of giving kudos to Philly for what it was that they were able to do. And this is just kind of one of those games, right? Like sometimes not everything falls your way. And the defense wasn't able to hold up for that full 60 seconds. Two big explosive plays of over 60 yards, one of which a touchdown, the other leading to a touchdown shortly thereafter. Just not the game that we're used to seeing from New Orleans, who sure keep their scoring streak on first drives going for this one, but not what we expected with a 3-point first half for the New Orleans Saints offense.
Yeah, bad omen when Eric McCoy goes out, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's, you got to have the next man up mentality. And defensively, you give up 460 yards. I mean, you get a couple of real big stops, some turnovers, all this stuff. You get several sacks on Jalen Hurts. I mean, for the most part, they were doing a good job, but we kind of pointed this out on, our pregame show that we can't just totally shut down Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. And then, man, Barkley, sure enough, he gets free in the second
Mhm.
half. He really gets it going. Saints obviously a little bit tired, but this chemistry thing, like right, where Saints offense can't get in rhythm. You got to put that defense out there for 10 plus plays, and then you get the offense a 3 and out. So like that's the kind of symbiotic relationship they need to have, and they didn't have that today. But there were some good things I think to point out from this, and then. I think the mentality of this team is different, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's something we pointed out last week in the win, with the locker room vibes. And I think that's the biggest thing is that can't sulk in this too long. Adversity is going to come. It came in week 3. And for me, it's how do they respond, right?
Yep.
Atlanta's next week. They know what's at hand there. They know they didn't play well on both sides of the football, right? But, I struggle when people say, well, it was just the offense's fault or just the defense's fault. Like,
No.
this is a collective effort. Like, there were a lot of dirty hands in this.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you can even go in and nitpick as far as to say that, like on that 4th and 1 try that the Saints went for, that maybe they should have taken the field goal there. Easy to say that. We always talk about how hindsight's 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the difference this game ends up being a field goal,
Yeah.
which could have ended up having a pretty big impact for them, and probably would have kept them in a situation where they didn't feel the need to go for two, and said could have kicked that extra point and maybe would have had a 16-point game as opposed to a 15-point game. So there's a lot of like what ifs, and then kind of those what do you call them? Hindsight is
Yeah, of
2020
course.
type situations that you can kind of go back to. But I'm with you on this one. I think that the thing that I appreciated about the New Orleans locker room after this one is that nobody was really hanging their heads. Like people say
Right.
that like the loss sucked because losing sucks. Like that's just kind of how it all works. But not really as kind of like the doldrums that you felt when you walked into the locker room after that Green Bay
Whew,
loss
yeah.
last year.
Totally.
Like it doesn't feel like
Yeah.
that. So a couple of big injuries that you're going to want to wait to see kind of how things pan out. Of course, Eric McCoy included. Cesar Ruiz left for a play and then came back. We'll see what he
Mhm.
looks like. And then Demario Davis going out later with hamstring groin tightness, according to Dennis Allen. So those are going to be three big ones to watch. And then, of course, can the Saints get Taysom Hill back on the
Yeah.
field for next week's game in Atlanta?
Yeah, and of course it's next man up mentality.
Mhm.
Lucas Patrick goes to center, Oliudo goes to guard, and then you had Cesar get hurt later, and then Nick Saldiveri comes in, and then even late, like Carr looked like he got hurt on that last play of the interception, but he said he just got the wind knocked out of him. But injuries are going to happen. You're going to have to face adversity at some point, and again, it is. You want to quickly turn the page. This is going to be a hard film rewatch, right?
Yeah.
Like there's opportunities that were out there that they left on the table. They're going to look at things and maybe the Clint Kubiak play calling wasn't as sharp today, right?
Mhm.
And that's going to happen because one of the things we pointed out is even early on, the offensive line, if it's not there, then this offense doesn't work. And this is a prime example of that. And I
Yeah.
think also you do have to credit Philly. Their front four was getting after it, not only the way they were able to plug the trenches, but just the anticipation, some tip passes at the line of scrimmage. I mean, I think they definitely did a really good job. Vic Fangio had it right there, and Zach Bond does a pretty good job
Yeah.
too. I think they did exactly what they needed to do, and from a game plan perspective, to be able to do what they needed to do to come out with a win, but definitely wasn't without a giant effort, right? Like you
Yeah.
point out, what was the stat that you were telling me about?
Oh yeah, this is the first time that Philly, you know what the Philly stat?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the first time that Philly has won a game where they were held scoreless in the first half since for 10 years. Like
Yeah.
this is a big win for Philly, and stinks for New Orleans to be the team to give that one up. I mean, it
Yep.
was a 3-0 lead at first half, but still something to pay attention to. I mean, like that's a good thing to bounce back on. And I think that for New Orleans going into this next game against Atlanta, it makes a ton of sense for them to be able to kind of look at this game and then see, okay, well, here's how Philly defended what it is that they typically like to do. So how do they prepare for that moving forward? I think that's going to be a big kind of diagnosis kind of opportunity for New Orleans going into next week up against Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some things to look at. I mean, I thought there was some good encouragement, to be had. Like I thought Chris Olave played it great, like
Mhm.
easily his best game, right? And then the touchdown that he was able to get in the end
Yep.
zone. I mean, that was all Chris Olave. They had a good pipeline working earlier, and it's just the run game is tough, and some of the play calls, especially on some of the third downs or the fourth
Yeah.
downs, I didn't like those play calls. And I know some people were like, well, it worked the other week, but your offensive line was deficient in a lot of ways because of Eric McCoy not being there. So it's like, maybe you shouldn't call those plays,
Yeah.
right? And then I thought maybe in the short yardage situations, might see a little bit more Jamal Williams and
Yep.
some of that, which you just need to get a yard. Dennis Allen said, we got to be
Mhm.
able to get a yard. And unfortunately, it just wasn't there for them today. And so they sink to 2-1. They could have had the chance to go to 3-0 for the first time since 2013. That's out the window. But now you said Atlanta's right behind them. And so you got to turn the page quickly. But, defensively, the explosive plays, this was a problem also last year.
Yep.
And so it's kind of one of those, how do they clean that up? How do they learn from it? I mean, it's the 61-yard play to Goddard. I mean, he was a nightmare all day, especially after Devontae Smith, which,
Mhm.
by the way, it was really good to see him sit up
Yeah,
and
for
walk
real.
off the field.
Jeez.
Like that was a scary moment. Ref should have blew that dead long before that all happened and stuff. But 61-yard play to Goddard, getting tangled and all that, like that can't happen.
Yeah.
And they know
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just one of those ones where like they knew that Goddard was the guy that they were going to go to. They tried to kind of be maybe a little bit aggressive there, but I thought the Saints struggled on defense the entire day when it
that.
came to crossing routes. And that was
Mhm.
just another one of those. You also saw another missed tackle on the right sideline that led to a big catch and run for Goddard at an earlier point in the game, too. So just some of those things that were kind of rearing their ugly heads for the Saints defense late that didn't allow for the time that offense needed to be able to kind of get into its groove. And then instead they had to switch to desperation mode, which is usually a 50-50 at best type of a situation. When you're in there, that's when you end up with the incomplete, or excuse me, the interception thrown down the middle of the field when it came to trying to target Rashid Shaheed. So, I think too, John, that this is a game that's indicative of a very large team management or roster management issue that I've seen in New Orleans for probably since the Sean Payton days. I want to get to that next year as we continue on with Second and Saints.
Hey, folks, John Hendricks here from Second and Saints. Look, we know it's the greatest time of the year again. Football's back, and it's here to stay until February. Look, over 1 million fans across 33 states got in a game last year by making picks on Underdog. Win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on your favorite player's stats, whether it's touchdowns, passing yards, and much more. Who doesn't like apps? And Underdog has a real easy app to use. But if you're like me, I like to use a website too. So when I want to look at more stats for a game or look at splits for Alvin Kamara, this is a good site for us to go check all of that information out. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward and signing up is even easier. Just head over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com, sign up with promo code Second Saints, and Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Second Saints to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. You must be 18 or older and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. I love Underdog because it's so easy to use and it's so fast to get started and play. Sign up process is really smooth and they have a slick mobile app. So what are you waiting for? Go check out Underdog today. Use that code Second Saints and we'll see you in the game.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much for being here with us as we continue on with Second and Saints today. John, I was saying that I think that there's like a big roster management issue for New Orleans that we've seen for years and years
Yeah.
and years. And it's the fact that they still have just, I don't know if the right phrase is refused or just haven't been able to, but for whatever reason, they still have no specific player to be their backup center on this roster. And so when you walk into a situation where you lose Eric McCoy, which is a big enough loss as it is, you move Lucas Patrick over, have him play out of position, and then you play Oli Udoh, who has played well at tackle but has struggled on the interior.
Mhm.
And we saw that all through training camp, all these other things. And the Saints just seem to have no answer for when a center is hurt. They always kind of have to, one injury impacts multiple spots in the offensive line. So when you have that happen and you have a defensive line or a defensive front that's doing a good job shutting down your run game and all the ripple effects that come with that, that to me is a huge issue that you're not able to overcome.
Yeah, I remember, what was it? It was a road game against Atlanta. I can't remember if it was Unger they lost or if it was McCoy, but it just was not good. I think it was against with when Sean was still there, and it was Unger that went out with something. That was a game where like everybody got injured and stuff. But definitely have to have a backup plan. And I get it that it's next man up mentality. And do you slot somebody on there? Like we've talked about, who are the possibilities? Because now with Eric McCoy's injury, it's something we got to pay attention to. He walked off really gingerly. We'll see kind of where he's at. They may get Taysom back this week, but Eric McCoy is so important to this offense. Like, I mean, protections, reads. He's so smart with it. Guy practices like nobody's business, like it's his last rep and such. But, what's going to be the play next week, right? Yep. Do you call up Shane Lemieux, who's also had some work at center, and then keep Lucas Patrick at left guard? Like, what does that look like? And I think that is something yet to be determined. Of course, you still see McCoy, but I'm with you. Like those types of things, feels like they prepare in just about every other scenario, but that one's probably one that leaves a lot to the imagination.
Yeah, it's just been such a long running issue for New Orleans when it comes to this, to have to upset multiple positions in the offensive line when there's an injury at these specific positions, particularly at center. And it's challenging because, look, Lucas Patrick has played very well at left guard. He struggled at center even throughout training camp when we watched him there. And look, Lucas Patrick has looked awesome at left guard. Yeah. So you'd love to keep him there. But Shane Lemieux also had all the errant snaps all throughout preseason and the training camp as well. So even moving him in at center isn't necessarily going to be the best thing. I remember when last year the Saints drafted Nick Saldiveri, we spoke with Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, and he mentioned that he thinks that Nick Saldiveri's best position is center, but he's never been played there here so far in New Orleans. So it's to be really interesting to see how they go about it. I imagine they'll go right back to Lucas Patrick as their center, go right back to Oli Udoh as their left guard if Nick Saldiveri's not pushing to get that spot otherwise. But I just think New Orleans has got to eventually succumb to the idea of having a backup center and somebody that is purely focused on that position, as well as maybe either of the guard spots. But they've got a lot of guards that can play center, not a lot of centers that can play guard.
Yeah. And look, you got Raheem Morris's defense right behind it, right? Like Atlanta's obviously not going to be a pushover opponent. And of course they play later against the Chiefs, and we'll see kind of how that plays out. But, Tampa lost. So it's the division kind of shakes out as it is. And it's week 3. Like, I don't think it sucks, like Derek Carr saying afterwards, you can be pissed about this loss. And I think you should, but I think the mentality from year over year, the way they're handling it is much different. And again, it's nobody's going to try to make excuses for him. I mean, at the end of the day, you lost because of multiple reasons. And so now you got to pick up the pieces, got to have a short-term memory, thick skin, if you want to call it that, just so many things, and then build a bridge and move on. And I think this locker room is equipped to handle that. And then, we're going to see, because Tyron said it after the game that we'll be ready for Atlanta. And then, of course, that's going to be the proof in the pudding, because they can't fall to 2-2. But, we somewhat talked about this as the likely course of action about, you pointed out stealing a game between Dallas and Philly, and then Atlanta's going to be a big win because you got Kansas City right behind them. So still a great opportunity, but now that Atlanta game becomes even more important.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can walk out of these first 5 games 3-2, it's better than pretty much anybody expected them to walk out. So if you can win this game against Atlanta, kind of gives you a little bit, especially against an AFC opponent in the Chiefs, gives you a little bit of wiggle room there to where maybe you surprise them. And if you don't, it's far from the end of your season. I think if I had to put like a number on it from 0 to 10 in terms of what my panic meter is for the New Orleans Saints right now, I'd probably be a very low 3. I might even say a 2 on that scale, just because look, I think that sometimes we knew this was going to happen. There was going to be a game to where the team was going to kind of come back down to earth. They weren't going to score 40 points in a game. That I expect them to score only 12? No. But do I expect them to continue to score only 12 points throughout the rest of the season? No, I probably don't. I don't know how much of like what happened today in terms of play calling and all that was impacted by the absence of Eric McCoy and what the offense was really able to do, not do, the absence of Taysom Hill, what the offense was able to do, not do. But I still saw things in this game that would have worked if Derek Carr had time. In the passing game would have worked if Alvin Kamara would have gotten just that one more block at the line of scrimmage. We've seen over and over again through the first 2 games this season, Alvin Kamara getting yards before contact. We didn't see that as much in this matchup, but when he got it, you saw the impact. He still had 86 rushing yards in this game. He quietly moved to second on the all-time rushing list for the New Orleans Saints.
Crazy.
It all falls flat because they lost this game. But I think that those are the things that you look at and you go, okay, yeah, they got their butts kicked in this game. Now let's see how they respond in the next, but I'm not pushing a panic button yet.
No, I'm with you. I mean, you can go back and watch this. It's going to be a lot of the Cars under duress or the running game. Why did they call this and what happens? But you got to learn from it because, I mean, Clint Kubiak is in his first year as offensive coordinator, right? So he's going to have to learn from this as well. And so there's just a lot of learning that comes from it. And again, teams that start hot don't always guarantee that they're going to be there in the postseason. I mean, Philly was a prime example. They were hot last year, looked like nobody was going to beat them. And then towards the back half of the year, they just really fizzled out and it was just kind of too late for them. But, you know, it's a loss. It's a close loss. I could deal with a close loss. If they would have got blown up, it could have been a lot worse, right?
It should have been a lot worse.
This should have been a lot worse. Like the 4th downs that, you know, Sirianni took with not taking the points and stuff. Like you could have been 24-3 at one point. You know what I'm saying? But there's a lot. And I think the pass rush has to be a lot better because there was some times they're just not getting any push, right? I mean, there's just so many guilty hands in this one. And again, they're not pointing fingers at each other playing the blame game, but they've got to learn quickly from it. We still want to hand out some game balls. And so who would get somebody on offense and then maybe defense?
Yeah, I mean, it might sound counterintuitive, but I would say that one guy that I think still deserves a game ball in this one's Alvin Kamara. I mean, the fact that he was able to pile on 86 rushing yards in this game and still be able to be an impact at a later point throughout is impressive, considering how poorly the Saints were executing in that run game because of how well Philadelphia was executing in their run defense. So I would give him one. Got to go with one for Chris Olave too. I mean, Chris Olave and Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr targeted Chris Olave on 3 separate 3rd and longs, and they converted each and every one of them, plus the touchdown on a great throw, fantastic throw, actually. Really nice catch by Chris Olave as well. So I would give those 2 guys some game balls over on the offensive side.
Yeah, Olave was going to be mine. I think Kamara just, he was also doing it in the receiving department too. So it wasn't the rushing department, but again, you know, there's a lot to be desired in some of this aspect, but I think Olave having a really nice bounce back. And I think the same could be said about Rashid Shaheed. I think he's in for a big bounce back. And of course, it might beg the question, do they need more firepower on offense at some point? And that's probably something for later, but I think Chris Olave deserves his game ball on offense, and same thing for Alvin Kamara. That's probably where I might stop. I mean, it's just hard because at one point, I think it was entering the 4th quarter, they didn't even have 100 yards of offense. Like it was just not there. Defensively, look, it's hard when it's 460 yards. I mean, you know, you got some pressures. I thought Carl Granderson probably would get one of my game balls. I think he played really well, especially early on with what he was able to do. Jalen Hurts force a fumble, sack. It was just there. There was a play, I think, before it was he was chasing down Barkley on the pass, but I'd have to give one to Carl Granderson on the defensive side. And, you know, there might be some other ones that you might look at, but look, Granderson is probably my top dog.
Yeah, I would go with Brian Brzee as well. I thought Brzee, look, I think that the Saints run defense kind of got exposed as still an area of concern today. We haven't really seen the run defense have to make big stops in this season so far because of how much ahead they've been playing over on that side of the football. But I do think that the interior of the run game got exposed a little bit. I'm very interested to see how it is that they address that. And then with the hopeful return of Colin Saunders, how that potentially even helps there. But I thought that Brian Brzee, for all intents and purposes, still had a really, really good game in this one. There was a couple of sacks in this one. There was also a play to where before the game, I'm not even making a joke here, but before the play, he was making a gesture, like a sign to everybody. It was like he was chopping wood. It was crazy. I saw him doing it over and over again. And then that ended up being a play where they ended up kind of rotating pass rush, sliding to the right. And then it was Chase Young that was able to make the stop on Jalen Hurts and enforce an incomplete pass at one point. So really, really good stuff from Brian Rizzi. I thought that he had the 2 sacks, but I think so because he had the 2 sacks, but also because there were some moments where he created on the interior.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a tough rewatch, but there are some things to call out. But again, when you lose a game, there are no like single victories or anything like that. But again, bottom line, 2-1. Atlanta's next up on the docket. We'll see how they kind of perform against the Chiefs. I'm interested to see because they've kind of hyped this game up in Atlanta a little bit, how big of a deal it is. I'm like, I don't know where that's come from, but look, nothing that really cost you this moment. But when it comes to December, late December and January, will this loss come back to haunt them like the Packers did? Because they needed the tiebreaker over the Packers last year and they couldn't get it. But I don't think that this team is headed for the same trajectory. Of course, we're going to find out a lot more against Atlanta next week. And of course, Ross, what kind of things are you working on at LouisianaSports.net? I mean, a lot to talk about after this game.
Yeah, big time. I'm going to look into dive a little bit deeper into what it is that Philly specifically did to stop the Saints run game and how the Saints might be able to counteract that a little bit going into these future games. I'll have my column up about why it's not time to hit the panic button later on tonight. We'll be looking at that. And then, of course, over at Locked On Saints, we'll be going live here in a little bit to just kind of break the game down a little bit further as well and just continue to break this one down. I think this is a very educational game. Yeah. And the New Orleans Saints have a lot to learn from it.
Absolutely. And, definitely when we're done here, be sure to go hop over to Ross. Not that you already don't, but go to Locked On Saints and be able to pick up his broadcast. And then for me, I just wrote about like kind of the deja vu is like, this seems eerily similar to last year, but I think that they're better equipped to handle this going forward. And, look, good and bad. We're going to look at the film. You guys probably seen some of the shorts and let me know if you like the shorts, if you read a big long form, something, whatever the case may be, but we're going to look at the film again. We're going to look at the bad. We're going to look at the good and celebrate it. But, at the end of it all, a lot more coverage based off of this game, a lot more to break down. And then it's going to be ready to get to Atlanta in week 4. We'll be out there and obviously we'll be doing pregame and all that fun stuff and see what else brews. But other than that, this is going to do it for Second and Saints, our post-game show. I'm John Hendricks on behalf of Ross Jackson. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, all that fun goodness. And, of course, check out all our links. Support the show. You guys have been amazing. Thank you again to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring us. We got plenty more spots if you guys are looking too. So shameless plugs. That'll do it for us today, guys. Have a good one. Chew on the loss, but build a bridge, move on. We'll be back on Monday with a renewed sense of attitude. Have a good one, guys. Thanks.